The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're gonna love it.
Okay, let's go.
I know war. What's going on in Palestine right now is not a war. It's not. It is the dehumanization, it's the genocide, it's the ethnic cleansing of a specific people to take their land. This is not war. These are people that are defending themselves. I see this constantly where people are just repeatedly dehumanizing these people. This is wrong. And there's nothing more American than speaking out against what's wrong. I can't tell you how many times I've seen horrible things. And this takes it to an entirely new level. The U.S. taxpayer is paying for this, which makes it even more frustrating. I'm paying for this. I am seeing what's happening to this. This needs to stop. This needs to stop. Whatever you can do, anything, this needs to stop.
But anyway, hey, I did want to play that clip from you, to start out. I had played that on the podcast before, but I think it really kind of sets the stage to our conversation. All right, listen, everybody, we've got Alan Shebaro. And the reason I was laughing when we came on was because I was making sure I was pronouncing his last name correctly. And he said, yeah, she borrows the money and she never gives it back. So anyway, hey, welcome, man. Really, really, really good to have you. I've been tracking you and stalking you down ever since seeing that clip of yours. And you know Josephine Gilbo. I think Elijah Kallenberg, two people that I highly respect and that I brought on the podcast, and we've had great episodes. And it's funny, I reached out to the two of them and I'm like, can you get me in touch with Alan? I really want to talk to this guy. And not only did they both help with that, but they both spoke incredibly highly of you. So welcome, buddy. Good to have you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Let's all right, let's start off with your military background, because I think that really sets the stage for the discussion we're going to have. So give us that.
My military career actually started in 1995. I enlisted as a lightweight vehicle mechanic, but in late 90s, there really wasn't much going on. Somalia was a few years earlier than that. Kosovo and everything that was being happening, like in the Balkans, was already dying down. So there really wasn't much going on. So I got out, jumped into the reserves, and then 9/11 kicked off, and I went right back in active duty as soon as I could, but I didn't want to go back in as a drill sergeant. So took a little bit of time, but like a couple of years, and I managed to get a chance to try out for selection for Army Special Forces and made it, moved through. So I was in the Special Operations community from 2004 to 2012. Primarily was start out in National Guard with 20th Group, and then I went active duty to 3rd Group, and then back to 19th Group. And I got out entirely in 2012.
So Army Special Forces, I mean, for us laymen's, when I hear that, I immediately think like the badass section of the Army, or like Navy SEALs, like Green Beret, like, is that what Special Forces is? Like, what does Special Forces do?
So every branch has their own specialty. For example, like the SEALs, maritime ops is mainly their primary focus, water missions and so forth. Doesn't mean that they don't know how to do urban or even rural. It's just what they specialize in. For the U.S. Army Special Forces, their primary or what they were originally designed for was foreign internal defense, which was FID missions, which is going behind enemy lines and training troops behind enemy lines to fight against whatever opposition they have within the country. So they're a full force multiplier. And that was the original design for them in Vietnam. Later on, they kind of evolved. And now you have specialty teams within special forces as well. So you have teams that specialize in maritime ops as well. You have teams that specialize in mountain warfare, teams that specialize in operative rescue and direct action, counterinsurgency and counterterrorism, which is the unit that I was in. So you have Halo teams, dive teams, all different types. So it has definitely evolved into different mission sets to be able to cover all different types of environments and terrains and so forth.
All right, let's talk about the 9/11 thing. And, I love your perspective on 9/11 now that we are, 25, 24 years later. And then after you give that, I'd love for you to help us understand how you felt at that time, because, I've talked to a lot of folks that have been involved in the military, and it's interesting to understand how they feel now where they've got all the facts versus how they felt then when they were, I guess maybe, I don't want to use the word brainwashed, but a lot of them use the word brainwashed. So yeah, give us your take on 9/11 now and then how you felt then.
So then I always have to, I got to preface it with the reason why I drank the Kool-Aid by the gallon. I was actually born on a military base, born on an Air Force base. I was raised on military bases overseas. And that was during I was in Italy. And so we had half of the population that still remembered World War II, that was still there during World War II. They experienced World War II. They experienced the liberation that the Americans gave the Italians, as they came in. And even talking, I remember sitting around talking to my grandmother, and there was some friends of hers that she was discussing, holding flowers for the Americans coming in. You know what I mean? And so we were always, I was raised from such a young age to see the American soldier as a liberator, as like a hero, right? And then to reinforce that, we ended up moving to Germany. And guess what? This was in the late 80s. So I was actually, technically, I moved to West Germany when we moved up there. So it was before the collapse of the Soviet Union and before the wall came down. And that was reinforced once again, like into my teen years. We had a lot of the Germans that were still alive that still remember a lot of, what happened in World War II, because that, had only been, 40 years prior. And the thing was about that was it was feeling that from the Italian population, not the Americans, because you'd always get that from the American side, how we're liberators, how we're like the greatest, and you're used to hearing that. But when you hear it from other people in different countries, that's entirely different. That really reinforces things. And so when I left Germany, I came back to the U.S. I didn't move back to the U.S. till I was 19, and then literally went right into the military. And then because I wanted to be a part of that history. So when 9/11 kicked off, this was my call to duty. This was what I needed to do for my country. This is where I stepped in, and I was all for it. It was pushed as we were attacked. This is something, let's go after them. Let's go do it. And I wanted to be involved to the point where I didn't want to even be on the sidelines. I wanted to be directly involved. And I did that. I think the thing that makes it real, and a lot of people have, and I'm not making excuses for for anybody, including myself, but once you're actually there, and there are it's not just one layer of the narrative that they're giving you about the WMDs and about the terrorist organizations and how they're threatening the United States and how that fear can become into reality. And you're at the front line that you need to stop it before it comes to the United States again, because we already experienced that, right? And that was probably one of the hardest things to get away from, was an entire life of being thought of as a liberator, and then having to face the fact that you're an occupier. Right. And it took me years to get away from that. Even after, the first time I got deployed, I didn't agree with what was going on. Don't get me wrong. But I understood, if someone came to Texas and did the same thing, I would be shooting at them. So it wasn't like I wanted to get shot, but I certainly did understand, their point of view. I wasn't vocal about that at all, but it was something that I did talk to some people about, very few. And I was very apprehensive about, because I didn't want to seem like I was in any way, shape, or form I didn't want to take it away from my patriotism. I wanted that strong. And then after Iraq, ended in, formally in 2011, but we still had troops there because people were still dying.
You were in Iraq. You were over there.
I was there 2007, 2008, 2009.
Wow. What about Afghanistan? Did you ever go to Afghanistan?
Never went to Afghanistan.
Okay. Talk us through so you're in Iraq for 3 years. I mean, what are you doing? What is that like?
So our job was specific to counterinsurgency and counterterrorism, direct action, and hostage rescue. We had specific targets that we went after. We never went like on a patrol. It was a very small unit, very small element that would, we'd have a time-sensitive information that we'd go after somebody, collect them up, bring them back, and try to gain as much intelligence as we can. So the thing is that for us, the intel was much more important than just a body count. So for us, it was really important to bring them back so we can gain as much knowledge as we can about the situation that's going on and the players that are involved. But it was very, very specific, very specific. So it was like, for example, we'd have packages that were built up over a matter of months, sometimes even years, to try to make sure that we actually had the right person going after them, pick them up. And, if we have to have the opportunity to get more, then we did like a follow-on. And sometimes it worked out that way, sometimes it didn't. But that was the primary mission for us.
And this is like intel on someone that is part of Saddam Hussein's regime, the general or whatever, someone in his military or someone in his cabinet. And like that intel is so good that like you guys go and find him, in Baghdad, like in the middle of a city in an apartment, and you basically take him. I mean, is that what we're talking about?
So the timeline's a bit off. Saddam already been captured, hung at this time by the time I got over there. But the 2007 was the influx of violence that we had seen since 2003. The highest amount of Americans were killed in 2007 than they were throughout the entire, until I believe the very beginning. And that's what, because the warlords were kind of acting up and raising up like their forces against the Americans. And so that was in Sadr City, which was right in Baghdad, which was a very, very intense hotspot. And the 2008, Tikrit and Taji, and then ended up in Mosul, way up north, because there was a huge spike of insurgency activities up there. And then in 2009, I ended up back in Baghdad. So those missions were all relatively the same, except later on in 2009, because it was kind of like dwindling down. We were handing over things to the Iraqi counterterrorist force and the Iraqi commandos. We were basically assess and advise, advisory roles more than anything else.
Okay. Let me ask you this. And by the way, you and I didn't get a chance to prep the way I like to prep, because I screwed up the time. I forgot you were 12 hours ahead. If there's anything I ask that is either too painful to talk about or you don't want to talk about, you're more than welcome to not talk about it. I'm curious, as you look back on, and again, I don't know how bad of stuff you guys did, or how, if you even viewed it as bad, but as you look back on your time there, like, do you have regrets about what you did, or do you not? And it's like, hey, we were there to do a job and you feel good about that job. Like I'm trying to understand the PTSD that's involved for you guys, and really for lack of a better way of putting it, maybe the clarity that's involved looking back now, when really you got into that under this weapons of mass destruction. And like you said, you were drinking the Kool-Aid by the jug. Obviously none of that ended up being true. And so as someone that has really tried to understand all of that, I look at 9/11, and then I look at the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, and then I look at a 20-year forever war that to me just churned money after money after money into this military industrial complex. And it seems like this just was all a big money laundering scheme. I'm curious, as someone that quite frankly enabled that from a military perspective, and again, I mean that with all due respect, do you look back now and think like, oh, shit, I can't believe I did that shit? Or do guys that you served with, like, where do you guys net out on that?
There's a mix. There are certainly people that feel the same way I do. And there's people that don't feel even remotely similar to what I do. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I was really good at my job. And I don't mean that to sound arrogant. Those were the facts. I was very good at my job. When I was there, what my entire priority, first off, was to make sure that the people to the left and right of me that I was going there with were to make it back alive. I was going to make it back alive, and then we were going to accomplish the mission, because what we were doing was good for the people, right? And we were doing good things. That was my belief. And I did everything that I could to better myself for that position. Now, when you fast forward later on, and to me, like, everything started collapsing probably like in 2022, 2023, was when everything just kind of like crumbled away. And the reason why is that, after we left Iraq-ish, and then after Afghanistan, that to me was, what did we accomplish? Like, what ended up happening? And this kind of goes into your question about, like, was it a big money line? There is people that benefited off of that. Definitely. There was trillions of dollars that were thrown into these wars. But who sacrificed and who paid the cost for those people to benefit off of it? There was corporations, there was individuals that profited greatly off what ended up happening at the cost of not just the hundreds and thousands of the innocent civilians that were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, American lives as well. And even this needs to be brought up, the cost of it as well, because that's still something that's lingering. That's something that's at the forefront now today with, we have people that are trying to, cut funding off from all these different places in order to make up for the mistakes we made in the past. The trillions of dollars that were spent to accomplish absolutely nothing, to put the Taliban and into a position where they are recognized legitimate government. I mean, that didn't happen until the Doha Agreement. And so when you look back and like, okay, we went there to take out the Taliban because they're bad guys, right? Even though we supported them 20 years before that. But if they're bad guys, okay, so we're going to take them out. 20 years later, we made them the official government. And we recognized them as in the Trump administration during the Doha Agreement was the first to recognize them and bypass the Afghan government and recognize the Taliban, the terrorist organization, as legitimate government. That solidified it. So what did we accomplish? Like, and so that just kept like that was rattling in my head so like for so long. I couldn't get it. Like, what did we do? And I gave you that brief history. If you can think about my entire life, kind of like accumulating to that point where like, this is what I was intended to do. And then my entire life revolved around the military and veterans. So for me, it was very difficult to back away and go, you know what, this isn't right. What we did was wrong. And then, because that would alienate me from the only, pretty much the most stable community that I ever had in my entire life. Right. And so it wasn't easy for me to come to this conclusion whatsoever. It was extremely difficult. It was, I didn't want to believe it. But we shouldn't have been there, period. We shouldn't have been in Iraq. We shouldn't have been in Afghanistan. We shouldn't have carpet bombed, all of the areas that we did. I mean, it was, looking back, I mean, you have to admit how a catastrophic failure that was. Nothing was accomplished, lives were lost, and trillions were spent.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's like I look back now, and as I've got into, this whole world of trying to just find truth, it's like we get in there because of the bad Taliban, spend 20 years, and then hand it right back to the Taliban. So those trillions of dollars, you know, it's not like if you go to Iraq and Afghanistan right now, they're these glorious countries and cities that look like Dubai and all of the Arab nations that are also, oil rich, but have played ball with the US. You know what I mean? So like after 20 years, after trillions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of deaths, I have to imagine Iraq and Afghanistan are no better off than they were at the beginning. So kind of to your point, that's what I'm saying. It's like, man, that's a tough realization for anyone that was part of the military who went through that. But again, it's not your fault. Please don't interpret it remotely like that. What I'm trying to wake everybody up to is that you've got to, look at our politicians and look at what they're doing. Look at the Bush administration, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, all of those guys, right into, the Obama administration. What did they accomplish? Right into even Trump's first term. It's like the amount of bombings and wars and all of that stuff. It's insane. All right. Let's get into the Israel-Gaza stuff, because I know that is obviously not only something you're passionate about, but you're very knowledgeable. You're very knowledgeable about that. So, here we are, 16, 17 months later, and here's another one. Here's another forever war, it feels like. But what is going on over there? What the hell do you think? Is this really a war?
It absolutely is not a war. A war you have at best a militia that's fighting against an established military, which is actually, I believe, like the fourth largest in the entire Middle East. That's also the only nuclear power. So when people say it's a war, I just like to remind them, so you have an organization that has a navy, let's backtrack, that has that nuclear arsenal, has a navy, has an air force, has tank divisions, has armored personnel carriers, and so forth, and is backed up by the world's military superpower, the United States, and the American taxpayer for giving them billions and billions, as much as they need, while they are consistently breaking international law, while they're actually, and this has been like a consistent occurrences for decades. There is, when you have a country that is occupying another one. And in this case, when Israel is occupying, and this is the ICC, this is the Human Rights Watch, this is Amnesty International, this is B'Tselem, which is Israel's own human rights organization, that are all making the exact same determinations that Israel is an apartheid state that is illegally occupying the West Bank and Gaza since 1967, that it's been committing all these different acts of torture and murder, the human rights, the human shields that they've been had documentation of for decades. This is nothing new. It's just new for some people realizing it. And again, how is that a war, right? How is that a war when you have someone that has collectively all these things that are backing up against, at best you can call a militia? That was, and then it goes into even more of a twist where that was been funded by Israeli leadership, right? So you have, and that's to maintain, to ensure that there's never a two-state solution, to divide the two different types of political groups that they have, the PA and Hamas, right?
Let's talk about that, because I don't think people understand that. So I'd like to kind of both explain that. So from what I understood, or from what I've read in 2017, and maybe even much longer, so Netanyahu was literally funding Hamas, or was he allowing the Qatari government to fund Hamas, or maybe a combination of both? And so he was equipping them in order for Hamas and then the Palestinian Authority not to get together. Is that your interpretation? So when you say the Israeli government is equipping them, can you just add a little color to that?
There's actually it was a really good article in, surprisingly, the Jerusalem Post. It was in 2019, I believe, that this one came out. And it was basically the headline paraphrasing right now, but it was this something about how Netanyahu's actions come to, to bite him. It's going to come back to bite him later on.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I saw that.
And then Ron Paul actually,
Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage the Palestinians to have a free election. They do, and they elect Hamas. So we first, indirectly and directly through Israel, help establish Hamas. Then we have election. Then Hamas becomes dominant, so we have to kill them. It just doesn't make sense.
Was talking about this in 2009 at a congressional hearing about, Bibi has been bankrolling Hamas and has been doing so for years. And so all these different things, this is nothing new. This is not like this grand conspiracy that people are just fabricating right now. This is something that's been going on for a very long time. The one thing that I keep hearing with all the people, I just recently got into a discussion with somebody here about it who's favorable on the Israeli side, talking about like their security. Like, well, the reason why, and I always have to kind of go back to this example, was during the time of slavery, you had slave rebellions. And no doubt the slave rebellions were absolutely atrocious. They were horrible. I mean, they were absolutely brutal. Beheadings, stabbings, men, women, children. But who do you blame on that? Right? So do you crack down more on the slaves, or do you end slavery? The reason why they're rebelling in the first place is because they want their human dignity back, right? They want their literal freedom, not just like what we're talking about right now, and being able to, post things on Facebook.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
we're talking about, people being able to, live in not just with peace, but justice as well. Right. So you have they say like, oh, we left Gaza in 2005. But the problem is that you still have control of the air, land, and sea. You have control of all the borders. You have, automated weapons that are pointing inwards, right? You have it's literally a walled-in area, and the cages that you have to go through in and out, they have full control of this. This is not, they didn't actually leave. They just shifted.
Yeah.
And then in the West Bank, I experienced that myself. All the different various checkpoints. And then, I mean, one thing that a lot of people, including myself, didn't realize is that, for example, when you had the Baruch Goldstein that went in Ali Brahimi Mosque and slaughtered, just like open fire during Ramadan while the Palestinians were there praying, ended up killing, I believe, 27 and then injuring like 51, was in itself such a horrific act. That's condemned by a lot of people, not just on the pro-Palestinian side, but also, some people that are Israeli even recognize that as well. I know the sensible Jews, the people that I know that are actually Jews, but that aren't Zionists, 100% agree that was just atrocious. But what happened after is what a lot of people don't know about. They shut down that market, right, which was like the central hub in Hebron for like 6 months, right? And so that played a huge role on people's livelihoods. And then what ended up happening, they put up more checkpoints. They put up the revolving doors and the cages, right? And then they took over 54% of Ali Brahimi Mosque and just took it over. So this is the justice that the Palestinians get. You have this psycho that came in there and decided to shoot up 27 people, injure 51 as they were praying unarmed in mosque, which is like, it's unfathomable. And then this is your justice. This is what you get. We're going to take over, the what you find, most closest to you in a spiritual way. We're going to take that from you. We're going to add checkpoints. So anytime you try to go pray, we're going to make it a hard time for you to know that we're here. And we're going to add checkpoints along the way around in this area as well. So we can arrest you every single time. That's the justice that you'll get.
That is
And people don't
insane.
understand that.
That's
That's
insane.
what their lives are.
No, I get it. So you've been to the West Bank? I didn't know that.
So I got with an organization, and I was trying to get in with this organization, with an NGO that was providing security for surgeons that were going into different hotspots around the world, combat zones. And they were trying to get a team to go into Gaza. I volunteered for that. So I was going to basically just, I was going to go into the West Bank and stage out of there, wait for the call, and then I'd be right there. So it'd be much easier to transfer over. Problem is that I never got the call, so I only went to the West Bank and never got to go to Gaza. And I basically just was experiencing how Palestinians are within the West Bank and Hebron. For the first month, I didn't have any connections or anyone. And then by the second month, I started making connections with the different human rights organizations that were established out there. And I knew things were bad. I just didn't have an idea to that extent. Like, how bad was it?
Like, it's
Right.
it's really bad, right? Like, it's bad. That's insane.
So, I mean, I don't blend, right? When I was, especially in Hebron, full, sleeve on my arm, it's a very conservative town.
Yeah.
And I just
And
don't blend.
you're a pretty big dude, right?
Fairly compared to anyone there. That was the
Okay,
thing.
yeah. That's what I'm saying.
But there's a couple of factors that I recognized while I was there. When I was there, the first place that I ended up at was in Bethlehem. And so I was like walking the apartheid wall for a few hours and just didn't realize like how far it went. And what I realized, and this is just my own perception of things, is I feel that a lot of this, like the reasoning for the wall, was because they don't want Israelis to know Palestinians. I don't think they want to. If you have a connection, there's a possibility for understanding. And if you have understanding, well, that shifts the tides entirely, right? And because now you're like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't know that you were doing this. And I had no idea that you were feeling this way. And so that dialogue that you can create, you have to eliminate that entirely. So for me, there's not just a wall, but when you're going into like any of the towns where they have the checkpoints, there's big red and white signs that Israelis are not allowed to go here. Right. So the only people that the Palestinians see, whether it be in the West Bank, whether it be in Gaza before then, but the only time that you see, quote unquote, Jews, they're just Israelis, is the IDF or settlers. Right. So even the Palestinians, the only perception they have of people is people that are raiding their home or try to take their home, or both. Right.
Yeah,
So
that's an excellent point,
when
man.
they hate Jews, right? They're literally talking about the only Jews that they've ever seen in their entire life is either A, they're trying to take their home,
Yeah.
trying to raid their home, or C, all of the above. So, and that's why I try to, like, from my experience from being there and trying to let people know like what I was going through, I had no problem telling people I was an atheist. Right. So it was either you're Christian or you're Muslim there, especially in Bethlehem. Everyone got along. No one gave a shit if I was atheist. No one cared. Nobody, that was the thing. And so when people try to have bring this narrative where it's like, oh, they hate the Jews. They hate the Jews because they're Jewish. Like, they don't hate the Jews because they're Jewish. They hate the Jews that are coming into their home and displacing them.
Yeah. At 2:00 in the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I have videos of that too.
That's an excellent point, man. That is an excellent point. There was a guy I had on the podcast who lived in the West Bank. His name was Sam Showman. This, was probably 6-8 months ago. And he said the same thing. He said, there's such separation. He's like, I've lived in the West Bank my entire life, and I don't know any Jewish person. I don't know any Israeli. And so, and I'm sure that's all by design, because exactly what you said, if a normal Palestinian and a normal Israeli got together and talked, they'd realize they're probably way more similar than they are different. And Elijah Kallenberg, he has for being 21 years old, the kid has like the sharpest take where he says, we have to stop looking at each other as others and look at each other as brothers. And it's so true, because fundamentally the average Palestinian and the average Israeli probably would have a beer together and be best friends, but they don't want that. They want to create that division. It's almost no different than the division here in the United States between the left and the right that's getting created, or that's been created. That's a great point, man. All right, let me ask you this question. Since you've got experience in the West Bank, you know what the country layout is like. October 7th, how does that event even happen? And how does that last for 6 hours when, from what I understand, Israel is the size of New Jersey? There's IDF every 6 feet, and there's checkpoints every 12 feet, and everyone has a machine gun. How does that even last for 6 hours? How do they penetrate the Iron Dome in hang gliders? What is that? All right, for everybody who's not watching the video, Alan just threw his hands up in the air because he has no idea. All right, good.
We have no clue. This is a country that prides themselves on intel, who pride themselves on preparation, on prevention of all these various. This is the whole reason why we're supposedly giving them so much money, that the billions of years for their intel assets, and they can't even protect their own back door, literally.
Yeah, yeah.
And the thing is that you want to talk about human shields. Why is it that they have the kibbutzes like literally right there across right from the wall? You know what I mean? So you have the Gaza wall that's right there. You want to, those are human shields right there, right? Because you don't have an entire housing division that is walking distance from the state prison. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
because there's a possibility, and imagine if they're armed too. You know what I mean? So it just, to me, it doesn't make any sense. Why? Where's the footage? They have footage that for nighttime, daytime, every angle for every part of that the walled structure, and yet it's not existent, right? And they're like, we do have it, but we're keeping it. I mean, if that would bolster your everything that you're trying to say, why not release it?
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing is that changed. It's like you brought up the 6 hours, I think, is more of an average. I've heard up to 10 hours. That was an extreme, but 8 hours. And then I've heard 4 hours. So 6 hours doesn't make any sense whatsoever. 0 sense. So I don't know. And I say that from, having the background I do in the military, and from looking at everything that was presented, no idea. I have no clue. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
All right. No, listen, it doesn't make any sense to a commoner like me. And so I wanted to see, maybe since I don't have that military background, maybe as a military expert like yourself, you knew something that I didn't, but I kind of knew the answer, but I was just kind of wanting to get your take on it. Yeah, it makes no sense. I don't even, these kibbutzes, like, what is a kibbutz? Is that like a little village, or what is that? Because I think you bring up another incredibly insightful point that none of us really understand is, A, what are they really? And then secondly, that's insane when you say they're right there behind the wall. So it's almost like that is the human shield. That was such a great analogy. But what is a kibbutz?
From what I understand, the kibbutz is like the settler villages that they set up.
Okay.
It is a Hebrew word, and it has a direct meaning. So I'm not 100% on that, but that's from what I remember. I think one of the biggest things that people fail to realize as well is, along with the security, along with all these things that are happening, like they're saying that they're constantly being rocketed, they're constantly being attacked, but no one has an understanding of why. Well, that's because they were constantly getting bombed. They had air raids. And I've heard these people saying that there was a ceasefire before October 7th and Hamas broke it. Just 2 days prior to that, 2 weeks, they did a air raid campaign. And not only just in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well.
Yeah.
There's so much misinformation and so much straight out lying that's coming out from the Israeli side. it's hard to keep up. The 40 beheaded babies, right? They had the Hannibal Directive. Yoav Galant, their own general that's being that's been served the warrant from the ICC.
Yep.
Has literally come out publicly saying yes, the Hannibal Directive was in effect.
Can you explain the Hannibal Directive?
So the Hannibal Directive was a this was 2000. I didn't get my numbers wrong on this. Like 2003, I believe. But there was an Israeli soldier that got kidnapped by the Palestinians side. I think it was by like Hamas, and they basically were able to exchange one soldier for 1,000 Palestinians, and they didn't want that to happen again. So the Hannibal Directive was to ensure that these negotiation deals couldn't be made or giving them any type of leverage. The Hannibal Directive was there to kill their own Israeli soldiers or civilians in order to make sure that for the greater good wouldn't be able to have any type of negotiating power, any type of leverage to get their side back. The footage that you see in a lot of these videos, you have vehicles that are trying to go back into Gaza, right? And the air show, not the air show, excuse me, the rave that was going on.
Yeah.
When you see the footage that they released themselves, that Israel released themselves, is you can't decipher, who's who, right? And then you have vehicles that are like full of people. And this is one of the reasons why their count went from 1,400 to 1,200. And now it's kind of like, we're not sure, but civilians wise, now they're saying, I think it's 760 something. But if you're talking like total, then, with the Israeli military personnel that were killed and, their law enforcement variation, like their paramilitary police, it goes up to the 1,200 number. But talking about civilians, because according to international law, they do have the right to resist, and they have the right to armed resistance, armed violent resistance. They have every right for that because they are being occupied illegally.
Yeah.
Now, the civilian side, they do not have the right on that. And I get shit constantly from people trying to make that, but you got to be realistic about this and got to be fair. The facts are that they do have the right under international law to resist illegal occupation with armed resistance.
And
they absolutely
and again, you're talking the Palestinians have that right, of course, because they're the ones under illegal occupation. I want to recap those numbers that you talked about, because this is something I think is incredibly important. So I remember that day, October 7th, it was a Saturday. It was like 6 a.m. or something. And you're exactly right. That day, they said 1,400. And then as time went on, that 1,400 became 1,200. And then within that 1,200, for argument's sake, it was, let's say, civilians, 500 military, or it might have even been 500 civilians, 700 military. But the bottom line is the net number was agreed upon to be roughly 1,200. And now here we are 17 months later. And what's the net number? It's the same 1,200. It hasn't gone up, except maybe for some of the hostages that have been killed. But I think people need to understand, when you say this is not a war, I agree with you, because there's no more casualties happening on that side. It was like a one-day event, okay? It was like a one-day sale. And then on the Palestinian side, I don't know, we're at 40,000, 50,000. Some estimates are up as high as like 600,000-700,000. I think it's very interesting.
Are you including Gaza and the West Bank, or just Gaza?
Yeah, well, just Gaza. What do you think the number is for just Gaza?
I mean, according to Lancelet, the medical journal, the French medical journal, they're saying up to 185,000. And the crazy part is that you have a organization that is stating this based off the data that are received and the amount of people that are hiding, like, for example, under the rubble. They're not hiding. They're under the rubble, where people are saying that they're hiding, but they're not. Sorry, I misspoke on that one.
Yeah.
Are literally
they
buried
are hiding. They're hiding, but they're permanently hiding, and they're not breathing anymore. So
no, I mean, the numbers that, sorry, it just kind of scrambled in my head that they're hiding the numbers because they are, or excuse me, inflating the numbers, not hiding, inflating the numbers in order to get more publicity and attention. But the thing is that they have this impossible standard that they're trying to meet anyway of having, like, you know, not just identified the body from family, but also like their ID that matched up with it. And I mean, all these different hoops that, you know, they have to jump through in order to say this is who they were. But there's definitely saying that the number is drastically higher. In the West Bank, even before October 7th, there was 291 Palestinians that were killed in the West Bank alone by either Israeli forces or settlers. So we're talking from January 1st, 2023 to October 1st, 2023. When people are saying like this just started, it didn't just start then, right? It didn't start October 7th. They've been dealing with this for a long time. And this is in the West Bank. This is not in Gaza where Hamas is under control.
Right. That's the thing. Americans don't understand. Well, actually, shit, maybe even people around the globe, that you've got the West Bank here, you've got Gaza here, and there is no Hamas in the West Bank. So why are people dying in the West Bank? You know, people are getting killed in the West Bank, and that's not where Hamas is. The West Bank is run by the Palestinian Authority. It's all so convoluted, and they make it so convoluted, and they make it so confusing to basically be able to do what they want to do and just, you know, distract people with other things. A buddy of mine, really interesting take, and I want to get your opinion. Actually, I want to get your opinion on two things. One is, he says that the reason Trump now wants to do this, like, we're going to completely demolish the rest of Gaza and put up Trump towers, whatever, I'm being a little, actually, maybe I'm not being facetious, is that they don't want independent cleanup crews in there because there are so many bodies under the rubble. And so they want to be able to clean that stuff up on the DL and not alert the world of all these bodies, because then that 40,000 or 180,000 could actually be 400,000. What do you think about that? You think that's plausible?
I think it's very plausible. Absolutely. It's the same reason why you have the highest amount of journalists killed in any modern conflict in modern history, right? And then you also have, so backtrack a little bit on that. You can't have like any type of independent journalism, so they only want the people that are there and they're saying, oh, it's because it's dangerous. World War II was dangerous. Vietnam was dangerous. All these other conflicts that have been going on, Iraq and Afghanistan, they're all dangerous, right? But yet somehow it's so much more dangerous there. But they won't allow them, and when they do allow them to go in, they have this guided tour, right? So absolutely, there is no doubt that is definitely, in my opinion, one of the reasons why. I don't think it's entirely like it just that reason, but I think it's definitely one of the reasons, because then you would have to try to explain that, right? And right now, the thing is that I find it hard to believe, like, how so many people that I know, not just veterans and people that are actually, I would consider to be, you know, of higher intellect, right? They have comprehension skills. They can read, and, you know, they're completely bypassing and ignoring the atrocities that are being committed and giving some sorry-ass excuse that's been parroted by an American politician that's been come up with by, you know, Israeli horrible Shebaro. And then they wonder why, you know, the Palestinians are always like in unrest. I'm like, because they're always being either, you know, they have settlements that are coming in and they're being displaced, but the ethnic cleansing that started in 1948 has not stopped. It's only continued. All right. And then they're like, well, we're God's people, according to who? Yeah. Right. And so the whole religious thing, I toss out the window almost immediately. And like that just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I'm not going to even dignify that. But for them to have like claim rights there, you don't get to claim the right just Jewish sovereignty. Right. The Christians had been there for millennia. The Muslims have been there for millennia. Palestinians have been there for millennia. No one has ever doubted if they're they have any type of, if they're honest about their history, you cannot deny that there was Jews that had been there for millennia. We're not debating that. But there's only 6%. The majority didn't come until 1948, where it was 750,000 that were displaced in order for them to have the Jewish majority, right?
Yeah.
And does Israel have the right to exist, not at the expense of other Palestinians? And I don't feel that any country that's an apartheid state has the right to exist. That's just me. If you're an apartheid state, I don't think you have the right to exist. I don't care where you are.
Right. Well, that's
the thing is,
that's how it
who
played
knows
out
about
in South
apartheid
Africa.
more than South Africa, right? Who knows more about that? And so if they're saying, yeah, y'all an apartheid state, I mean, they came up with the word.
No, that's insane.
Right.
That's insane. South Africa was the original OG apartheid state. And so they know something about apartheid because they invented it. And they're the ones saying Israel's an apartheid state right now. So there's credibility there. All right, let me ask you this, man, because I want to get you back and talk a bunch of other things in the next episode. What do you think's next? What's going to happen? I mean, what do you see playing out over the next, I don't know, several months, the rest of this year, the Trump administration? What do you think's next? And is this going to end, or is this the next forever war, Afghanistan, money laundering, military industrial complex for the next 20 years?
So let me say this first about the money that we're sending to Israel. I mean, as an American taxpayer, I mean, it is absolutely, you can't ignore the amount of money that the U.S. has dumped, into Israel for decades. That, $310 billion and counting since 1948, with no oversight, no accountability, and no debate. I think that's probably the craziest part about this. So while our government is constantly questions like foreign aid to other nations, foreign aid to, different programs, Israel gets a blank check year after year, despite it being a wealthy, developed country with a better standard of living for its citizens than many American citizens. And yet we have a fifth of all of the United States, foreign aid going to Israel. I mean, since 1948, the U.S. has subsidized Israel's military and its citizens benefiting from universal health care. They have pretty much, a free higher education, a strong social safety network that most Americans don't even have, right? Their economy, at least prior to this, before everything started, I think that was the biggest thing, is that they're not doing this in the shadows anymore. Why does the American working class have to struggle with the healthcare? I mean, more than the highest amount of bankruptcies in the United States are due to medical bills, right? That is the main reason for bankruptcies in the United States. But yet we still have, I mean, between 1951 and 2022, there was like $225 billion, 71% of all U.S. aid was going to Israel, right? And that went directly into its military. In 2016, the U.S. locked in that 10-year deal, right, where they were the $38 billion, but like in a 10-year package. So was it 3.3 annually, and then like $500 million for their missile defense and the Iron Dome.
The Iron Dome, yeah.
I mean, this is fully funded by the U.S., right? And what does the American taxpayer get out of this, right? And just something for people to think about is, what did the American taxpayer get out of Afghanistan, Iraq? I mean, when we can go back, all the way into and I tried doing this and trying to find out the benefit the benefit to the American citizen from destabilizing Iran in 1953, right? All the different countries that we destabilized since.
Yeah.
Destabilizing Syria, we have a massive immigration problem, but we destabilized their country and put in a dictator, made their country a shithole, and then wondering why it is so bad and why they want to come to the U.S. One, you kind of advertised, come over here, and then you destabilize their country. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah.
You got Haiti, the only country where its peoples, they revolted against their occupier and defeated the French, and not just fought and won, but they defeated their occupier, and they kicked them out. And they've been paying for it ever since. With embargoes, with the sanctions, I mean, all trade has been cut off. That's the punishment that they get for liberating themselves.
For liberating themselves. Exactly. You talked about, have you seen that? There's a great clip from General Wesley Clark where he talked about when he went to the Pentagon and the guy brought him a memo and's like, "Sir, we're invading Iraq." And he's like, "Why? Did they find anything on Saddam Hussein?" "No, nothing new there." And then the guy's like, "Here's another memo. He said we're going to invade 7 countries in 5 years." And literally all the countries, I think it was Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, maybe Lebanon, and then the final one was Iran, which again, that is the crown jewel. I feel like, and I tell this to all my friends when we have these discussions, it's like, right now, everything Netanyahu is about is provoking war with Iran. Like, that's what he wants. That's all that's really left. I mean, that's the big thing that's left, and that'll accomplish those 7 countries in 5 years. But you're so dead on with all this, the destabilization of these countries, that leads to the immigration problems. We fuck up all these countries, and then whether it's the United States or whether it's Europe or London or all these other countries get all these, immigrants, it's like, you're the one that told them to come here. It's a mess, dude.
That's how I mean, the labor force in the United States is what makes the United States function. This is how that top 1% makes all their money. They're not doing the work. They're depending on the workforce below. So it's interesting to watch people kind of going back and forth on this. And then you have, like, for example, like the on a global scale, where you destabilize a country. And keep in mind that one thing I like to tell people, and just to make sure it's clear, is the U.S. doesn't have friends or allies. It has interests, and that's it. And a perfect keen example for this is that I had a good friend of mine that was in Somalia, and we talk about this all the time. I'm like, why were we in Somalia, by the way? Why? Like, tell me, because I knew some of the guys that were in Ranger Battalion at the time, and the harrowing stories that they were telling me about that. But why were we there? And like, you take out Muhammad Farah Adid, and the warlord, and it sounded so humanitarian. Like, holy shit, I wish I could have been there. Right? Yeah. This is like, maybe. What they failed to mention was Shell, Exxon, BP, them having the corporation set up in Somalia to try to drill off the coast of Somalia. Right? And everyone kind of looked at me like I had the tinfoil hat on. And I was like, how are you going to try to deny this? And then guess what they're doing right now? We have a puppet Somali president that's in there. And guess what they're doing? They're drilling off the coast of Somalia. You know what I mean? So it took a little bit of time. But we have what I call, well, I don't call it. There's a very interesting perspective when we're talking about colonization. And when I got into this debate with somebody, it's a informal colonization, right? We have 750 military bases span across around the world from the United States. And when anybody gets close to that, or nobody is even remotely close to that number, by the way. But what I'm saying is that everyone gets remotely close to the United States, continental United States. It's like, oh my God, versus we have military installations that all up and down Russia. Right? The border of Russia. Same thing with Iran. The same thing with it, like all over the Middle East and Africa and so forth. Right? So is it colonization? No, we don't have people that are going in there and settling and saying this is kind of like a newer model of like informal colonization, right?
Yeah,
where they have the military presence in there. And I think we're making so many enemies. And I kind of go back to, what you're asking me. And this is just being as honest as I can. I have no idea, because it's like trying to figure out, I'm going to give a Red Bull and some sugar packets to a 5-year-old child, and I'm going to put him in the playground with a bunch of people he doesn't like, and then a bunch of people cheering him on. What's going to happen? Right? Is he really going to go over there and is he going to start a fight at the tetherball area, or is he trying to go over here and, try to convince these people, to try to take over the jungle gym? Who knows? You know what I mean? It's because you have someone that is literally saying, look at me, look what I've done, when he hasn't done anything except for, was it the Gulf of America now, which, yay,
Yeah.
that was,
Yeah.
that so much benefit. But everything is literally, nothing is going to be benefit for the American taxpayer. If you notice, like the people that were supporting them, they're not talking about grocery store prices anymore. They're not talking about their day-to-day anymore. They're not talking about gas prices. They're not talking about that. They're talking about everything that's the talking point that he's brought up about, like these small little things. If you really wanted to eliminate, like, for example, like the whole Doge thing, this is literally just a distraction. Right? Go over these small programs. Go, we can cut $30,000 there, or we can cut the $14 billion from Starlink and Musk, the subsidized funds that we give him. I mean, that's a pretty big chunk of money, or the subsidies that we give to the hedge funds.
No,
Or,
absolutely.
the pharmaceutical companies, you know what I mean? Or the oil and gas companies.
I've said that about Doge. I'm like, listen, the rubber's going to meet the road if and when it's time to cut the defense budget, because Elon is one of the government's top 5 defense contractors. And so if you're not going to go after, by the way, the biggest part of the American budget, $850 billion to potentially $1 trillion, that right there. The problem is, man, it's just, look at the shiny new thing here. Look at the distraction here. Look at, let's talk all about, the presser between Zelensky and Trump, and they treated him bad, or he was this. Nobody's getting to the heart of the issues. But I also appreciate you bringing up the military bases. I didn't realize we have 750 or probably more military bases across the country. I love the way you put that, where it's almost like a informal colonization, because that's really what it is. It's like we're colonizing there, but through those military bases. So we've got a presence without, technically having a presence, man. All right. Anything else, man? Anything else you want to share? I'm going to put all your social media handles everywhere, but is there a platform in particular that you try to spit knowledge on, or do you kind of put your stuff everywhere, or do you not even care about that stuff? You let guys like me put your stuff places.
The strange part is that even the one that went viral from the McKinney City Council, that was actually done by a friend of mine. She had actually called me up and hey, did you go? I was like, yeah, but I didn't know anyone there. No one recorded it. She was like, oh, I can find it. I mean, they're all recorded. So she actually went there and recorded it, edited it, put it together, and then sent it out. And then I was like, I looked at it a few days later. I was like, holy shit, it's in the millions already, know? So I got to give all the credit to her on that one. And it was very unexpected. It was, I think one of the big things that came out of that specifically was being in the West Bank and people recognizing me. That was extremely impactful, right? So the one thing I asked everyone there, I felt useless. I had a gun drawn on me 9 times by Israelis. I had.
Why? Why did they draw a gun on you?
Whether in checkpoints, walking around, being too close to them while they're 20 feet away, yelling at a, hijabi girl that's 14 years old. Whatever the case may be, they're just really quick on, and they're kids. They're horribly trained anyway. I mean, they're the majority of them are reservists, so they don't have any understanding of what's going on for the most part. The only combat that they see, quote unquote, is literally attacking the Palestinians. Yeah. They don't go anywhere else.
Yeah.
So, and they don't have a concept of that, people fighting back, actually.
Yeah.
But the one thing that they were telling me is speak out for us because we don't have a voice. And so any opportunity that I have to jump on and kind of relay my experiences, the things that I've accumulated from my time over there, and the things that I've been able to gather from reading either history books or the things that are happening now. I try to just pass them on and reinforce what a lot of people if they already feel the same way I do, possibly even change minds if some people didn't feel that same way. And the main intent for me is at least to spark some type of interest where they go, well, let me check that out. Let me at least fact check that, right? And I think that's what kind of leads more to anything else is they're willing to go and look something up on their own, right? They're inquisitive enough to actually want to actually learn about it, or at least disprove what I say. And when it gets down that track, they're like, wait a minute, I want to disprove it, but there's nothing to disprove, right?
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that at the least, at the very minimum, anyone watching anything that I'm on, whether it be this one or any other podcast, it triggers them to do some research on their own to find out what's going on versus listening to even myself or anybody else. But take that line and find out what happened at the Flower Massacre. What happened, to the video surveillance from the CCTV and for all the security cameras on October 7th. Any of these points that we brought up, find out about it. Hey, what happened to 40 babies? Was that really real?
Yeah. That 40 beheaded babies thing drives me crazy because it's been debunked. It's still being used, exactly. And literally the reporter from CNN who broke the story, she came out 4 days later and said, hey, this was not true. There was no clarification on this. She literally said that they told her in her earpiece, and it was like an Israeli person in the government got whatever the other side of the walkie-talkie and said it in her earpiece, and she said, oh my God, we're just getting news. There's been 40 beheaded babies. So she literally, I'm blanking on her name, but the CNN reporter herself came out, rebuked it, said that's not true. And literally to this day, you'll hear politicians up to Trump level who will say the beheaded babies. It's insane, man. It's insane. All right, listen, hang on the line. All right, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode today. Alan, it's been a pleasure. Hang on. Call a spade a spade. We'll talk to you soon, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.